Well, welcome to the 700 Club, and thanks so much for joining with us. A top-level meeting between Israeli and U.S. officials is back on. Prime Minister Netanyahu had previously called off the meeting after the U.S. failed to veto a UN Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire.
Netanyahu says he canceled it as a warning to Hamas. Israel will not be pressured into ending the war. Chris Mitchell reports.
Announcing that the Israeli delegation to Washington is back on, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said he canceled it to warn Hamas that Israel will not be pressured into ending the war or giving up on its hostages.
It was a message first and foremost to Hamas: don't bet on this pressure, it's not going to work.
All this triggered by a U.S. refusal to veto a UN Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire without linking it to the release of the hostages. Former U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman told CBN News the U.S. action aided Israel's enemies.
Hamas was celebrating this. Ismail Haniyeh from Hamas traveled to Tehran to do a victory lap, with the mullahs about this. I mean, this was considered a victory for Hamas. Now, any UN resolution that's a victory for Hamas is obviously a move in the absolute wrong direction. The idea that you could pass a resolution and not condemn Hamas as part of it is just unthinkable.
Meeting with U.S. lawmakers in Israel, Netanyahu said they're just a few weeks away from finishing off Hamas as a fighting force. However, much of the world opposes an Israeli invasion of Rafah, the terror group's last stronghold.
And we think there's a better way, and we want to have the opportunity to present that better alternative to Israel. So we do think it's important that that meeting take place.
Netanyahu insists that the 2 million Gazans in Rafah can avoid the battle by simply moving back north.
Yes, they have a place to go. Second, we provide them food. The problem was not the entry of trucks. The problem was the stealing of trucks, both by looting by Hamas and looting by others and so on.
In Jerusalem, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham says the U.S. should support Israeli forces going into Rafah to destroy Hamas's last 4 battalions.
October the 7th was like Pearl Harbor and 9/11 on steroids for the Israeli people. And the response to October the 7th is total victory. The destruction of all military capability, battalion-wise, of Hamas.
Graham also explained why Israelis are so troubled at the UN resolution demanding a ceasefire without demanding Hamas free the hostages.
I understand the Israeli position. You have to be clear there will never be a ceasefire unless the hostages are released.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
It's a sad day for Israel when it can't depend on its allies, and it seems like the world is turning against her. We reported about a week ago that Canada was resuming payments to UNRWA, the UN Relief Works Agency that is quite clearly implicated in the attacks. Employees that were paid with UNRWA money were part of the attack group on October 7th. It just boggles your mind that they would resume payments without first making sure that it wasn't being diverted into further terrorist activity. And then to hear that Ireland has joined in this international court to claim that Israel is committing war crimes, it just boggles your mind that people aren't holding Hamas accountable for the war crimes that they committed. They attacked innocent civilians. They used rape as a method of war and terror. They took hostages. They took young children hostages and have been holding them in dark tunnels for forever. And in all of that, Israel is being blamed, not Hamas. Hamas is the reason the people of Gaza are suffering. Hamas is the reason for this horrible war. Hamas is the reason that Israel had to attack, because they vowed to repeat October 7th again and again and again. Where's our moral standard here? Where's our fiber? Where's our backbone to say, no, you can't do this. This has taken you well beyond the civilized world, and we can't allow this ideology to stand anymore. Let me underline something else, because we showed a picture in that piece of the hostages. In all of this, we're forgetting that they're American hostages. Let me show you their picture where you can see for yourself. There were 8 that were taken. We don't know how many of them are still alive. And their bodies, if they have perished, their bodies are being held. We think 4 are still alive, but you don't hear any of that in our news today. If this were any other situation, people would be pounding the table for our citizens to be released. The government would be talking about using our military to get them back. None of that is happening here, and I just don't understand why. So, could you please call your congressman? Could you please call your senator? Let them know how you feel, that you want us to stand with Israel, that our hostages need to come home before there's any kind of peace agreement in Gaza. Well, in other news, divers recovered the bodies of 2 men missing since Tuesday's collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
Thanks, Gordon. 4 other construction workers are still missing. Today, we're learning more about the victims as well as what happened in the moments leading up to the striking of that bridge. CBN's Charlene Aaron has the story.
Divers uncovered the bodies of 2 men trapped in a red pickup 25 feet underwater as officials seek answers after the cargo ship Dolly slammed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge early Tuesday.
The victims were identified as Alejandro Hernandez Fuentes, 35 years old, of Baltimore, and Dorlian Ranial Castillo Cabrera, 26 years old, of Dundalk.
4 men remain missing and are presumed dead. The victims, who were part of an 8-man construction crew fixing potholes on the bridge, were from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Samuel Rodriguez of the National Hispanic Christian Leadership Conference issued a statement saying, "This unfortunate event underscores the sacrifice and dedication of so many immigrants who come to this country willing to work hard and build a better future for themselves and their families." NTSB agents boarded the ship, reviewing damage and collecting evidence, including interviews with the captain and other crew members. Officials also took possession of the ship's black box. Data shows the captain called for tugboats at 1:26 a.m. At 1:27, the pilot reports they lost all power and are getting close to the bridge. At 1:29, sounds of a collision can be heard. Officials say the vessel had at least 56 containers of hazardous materials on board at the time of the crash.
Even though they're hazardous, we've determined that there really isn't any kind of threat to the public.
Meanwhile, the Coast Guard says the cargo ship had undergone routine engine maintenance in port before the accident. The port remains closed, cutting off a major shipping hub. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Thank you, Charlene. The nation's capital is gearing up for an Easter Sunday annual tradition right on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Each year, thousands head to the National Mall to attend one of the country's largest Easter sunrise services for praise, worship, and prayer, all in celebration of Resurrection Sunday. The interdenominational event has been attracting believers from all over the world for more than 40 years. Our viewers can watch the Easter morning service online at 6:30 a.m. Eastern on the CBN News Channel, the CBN News YouTube page, or our website at cbnnews.com. Well, as churches prepare for Easter celebrations, worship teams are prayerfully preparing for service. For some, the weekly pressure of getting ready for Sunday morning can be overwhelming. The worship band Shane and Shane hopes to remove some of that stress. CBN's Brody Carter tells us about their online initiative to help.
It is possible to find everything you're looking for in Jesus. All creatures of our God and King.
College friends Shane Barnard and Shane Everett bonded over Jesus and music more than 25 years ago. That partnership has allowed Shane and Shane to reach hearts worldwide through their award-winning albums. In the last few years, they've made it a point to encourage worship leaders to deepen their walk with God.
We think the church is the answer, and we think the church is limping. And that's okay. God can use limping people. And so if you're a limping person, come and walk with us.
To help Christian musicians in that journey, Shane and Shane created the Worship Initiative, an online resource with lessons and videos focused on the music and growing a relationship with God.
We exist to do is come along worship leaders and just daily and weekly encourage them with the truth of God's word.
And so you go in, you log into the Worship Initiative, and you can take all kinds of classes. And we have interviews with people like Phil Wickham to John Piper. I mean, like, so the gamut is so wide, you know?
After 10 years in service, the Worship Initiative is now partnering with Glue, an online connection engine and marketplace, expanding their services to some 70,000 churches who use the Glue platform.
The average size church is well under 100 people. And so what that means is that church may have a limitation on its access to quality resources.
Brad Hill, Chief Solutions Officer with Glue, says the Worship Initiative is their top seller on their marketplace, celebrating the Easter season with a curated set list and teaching for churches looking to get involved.
Because they know that when people drive away from the church after Easter weekend, often people are going to remember and reflect on the sermon and the music. Those are the two things that people normally talk about.
With Easter on the horizon, what is it that you would speak into local pastors, local worship leaders?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind in the midst of all of that is like, man, the pressure is off. Like that, the battle is the Lord's. Or you're not secure or validated because the pastor thinks you did awesome or not awesome. You're secure and validated in Christ.
For worship leaders at First United Methodist Church in Graham, Texas, it's been a godsend.
Before the Worship Initiative, I was scrambling for resources. After the Worship Initiative, I know what to practice. I know how to help other people to practice.
Resources and more like it can allow churches to build up its people, ease stress, and focus on celebrating Jesus every day, not just Easter Sunday. Brody Carter, CBN News.
Thanks, Brody. So many important reminders there, Gordon, from the fact that God uses gimpy people and the fact that the battle is not ours, it's the Lord's.
Yeah, he does use anybody, and I'm living proof of it. I like to remind people God has a sense of humor, and that's why he created me. But in worship, realize it's not performance. You are giving praise and adulation to the King of Kings, the one who died for you. And in that death, can we show forth his death in us? I must decrease, he must increase. Let us glory in our weakness, because when we recognize that, his strength is made perfect. It's made perfect in every area of our life, but especially in worship.